My brothers and sisters in the light in 1947, Bedouin shepherds searching for a lost goat stumbled upon a cave in the cliffs near the Dead Sea. Inside that cave, they discovered ancient jars containing scrolls that had been hidden there for nearly 2,000 years. What followed was one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history, but also one of the greatest and most systematic cover-ups of ancient knowledge the world has ever seen. Certain scrolls, the ones with the most explosive content, were quickly acquired by institutions that had powerful reasons to keep their contents hidden from the public. Chief among these institutions was the Vatican, which moved quickly to secure access to documents that threatened its theological positions, its historical claims, and most importantly for our discussion today, its financial interests. For decades, over 40 years, access to many Dead Sea Scrolls was restricted to a small, carefully selected group of scholars, most of whom had deep connections to the Catholic Church. This was not an accident. This was deliberate control. Translation work proceeded at an impossibly slow pace. Publication was delayed for years, sometimes for decades. Scrolls that should have been made available to the entire scholarly world were locked away in climate-controlled vaults, studied only in secret. Their contents revealed only in carefully controlled fragments and releases that could be managed and interpreted by the controlling authorities. Other scholars grew increasingly frustrated and suspicious. Why the delays? Why the secrecy? The standard excuses that the work was delicate, that the fragments were difficult to assemble, that proper scholarship required decades of careful study, convinced fewer and fewer people as the years stretched on. What were they hiding? What was so dangerous about these ancient texts that they needed to be kept from the world for 40 years? The truth, which has now emerged as the scrolls have finally become more widely accessible, is that some of the scrolls contained teachings that fundamentally threatened the institutional church and the broader economic systems it supported. Teachings about direct access to God without the need for priestly mediation. Teachings about community economics that challenged traditional church financial practices. And most relevant to what I will share with you today, teachings about debt and financial freedom that would have undermined the entire system of financial bondage that has enriched both religious and secular institutions for centuries. Today I am going to reveal the contents of a scroll that the Vatican suppressed for over 4 decades. A scroll that scholars call the Economic Instruction Text. A scroll that contains specific, practical, immediately applicable instructions for living completely free from debt, now and forever. Instructions so simple that anyone can follow them. So practical that they work regardless of your income level. So effective that if they were widely known and practiced, the entire debt-based economy that enslaves billions of people would collapse overnight. The Vatican knew this. The banking families who have profited from debt for generations knew this. The powers that extract wealth from ordinary people through interest payments and financial bondage knew this. That is exactly why this scroll was hidden. That is why these teachings were systematically suppressed. And that is why you are only hearing them now, after decades of secrecy finally gave way to broader access as scholars revolted against the information monopoly and forced the release of the full scroll library. Let me tell you the full history first, so you understand how we got here, then I will reveal the teaching that was hidden from you. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, an international team of scholars was assembled to study and publish them. But this team was dominated by Catholic priests and scholars with Vatican connections. They controlled access absolutely. Other scholars were denied permission to study the scrolls directly. Photographs were restricted. Publication schedules stretched into decades. By the 1980s, the scholarly community was in open revolt against this secrecy. Accusations of suppression were widespread. Independent scholars began publishing unauthorized transcriptions based on whatever materials they could obtain. Finally, in 1991, the Huntington Library in California broke the monopoly by releasing photographs of the scrolls without permission from the official team. What emerged when the scrolls became fully accessible confirmed what critics had suspected. There were teachings in these scrolls that institutional religion had reasons to hide, not because the teachings were heretical or dangerous in a theological sense, but because they threatened institutional power and institutional wealth. Among the scrolls that had been most carefully restricted was a document scholars call the Economic Instruction Text. This scroll, fragmentary but readable, contains specific teachings about debt that were practiced by the Essene community for over 200 years. And these teachings produced a remarkable result. The Essenes lived completely debt-free as a community for their entire existence. No member of the community ever owed money to anyone outside the community. No member was ever enslaved by debt. No member ever lost property or freedom due to financial obligation. For over 200 years, in an economic environment where debt bondage was common and often led to actual slavery, the Essenes remained completely free. How did they achieve this? The Economic Instruction Text reveals their method. The Essene approach to debt was built on three foundational principles that work together to make debt unnecessary and undesirable. Principle 1. Never borrow for consumption. The Essenes distinguished sharply between needs and wants, between necessities and luxuries. They taught that borrowing for consumption, for things that would be used up or worn out, was a form of slavery. When you borrow to consume, you obligate your future labor for present pleasure. You make yourself a servant to whoever lends to you. You trade future freedom for present comfort. The Essenes consumed only what they had already earned. If they did not have resources for something, they simply did not acquire it. They waited until they had saved enough to purchase outright. This simple discipline eliminated most debt before it could begin. This principle challenges everything modern culture teaches about money. We are trained from childhood to borrow for consumption. Credit cards, consumer loans, financing for furniture, appliances, vehicles, vacations. The entire modern economy is built on convincing people to borrow for consumption, to enjoy now and pay later, to obligate future earnings for present desires. The Essenes said this path leads to bondage, and they were right. Look around you. Millions of people are enslaved to debt, working not to build their future but to pay for their past, sending monthly payments to creditors for things they consumed long ago. The Essenes saw this coming 2,000 years ago and refused to participate. Principle 2. Save before you spend. The Essenes practiced aggressive saving from every source of income. Before any money was spent on anything, a portion was saved. Not invested, not risked, simply saved. Stored away for future needs. This saved capital became a buffer against emergency, a fund for larger purchases, and eventually a source of wealth that could be deployed productively. The Economic Instruction Text specifies that members saved at minimum 1/10 of all increase before any spending occurred. Some members saved much more. This systematic saving meant that when needs arose, resources were available. There was no need to borrow because savings existed to cover unexpected expenses. This principle also challenges modern practice. Most people spend first and save whatever is left over, which is usually nothing. They live paycheck to paycheck with no buffer, no reserves, no margin for the unexpected. When emergencies arise, as they inevitably do, they are forced to borrow. The debt spiral begins because saving was never prioritized. The Essenes reversed this. Save first, spend what remains. Build reserves before building lifestyle. Create margin before creating obligations. This simple reversal eliminated the need for most borrowing. Principle 3. Community support replaces credit. The Essenes recognized that sometimes members would face genuine emergencies beyond their personal reserves. In these cases, the community provided support, not loans. The support was given freely, without expectation of repayment, without interest, without obligation. This community support system eliminated the need for external borrowing. If a family faced a crisis, the community helped them. If a member needed capital to contribute to community enterprises, the community provided it. No one needed to go outside the community to borrow from those who would charge interest and create bondage. This principle is perhaps the most radical of all. Modern people have no community to fall back on. When emergencies strike, they turn to banks and credit cards and payday lenders who profit from their desperation. The Essenes turned to brothers and sisters who gave freely from abundance, who helped without creating bondage, who supported without exploiting. Before I continue with specific practices from the scroll, let me share something important. What I am teaching today is just the beginning. The complete debt freedom system from the Essene scrolls has been compiled into my 21-day protocol. It is called the Essene Wealth Code, 21 Days to Financial Freedom. In this guide, you will find these principles explained in full detail, with practical steps for eliminating existing debt and preventing future debt. The link is in the description below. Now let me reveal the specific practices the scroll teaches for achieving and maintaining debt freedom. Practice 1. The Debt Forbidden Vow. When a member joined the Essene community, they took a vow never to enter into debt for consumption under any circumstances. This vow was treated as sacred, as binding as any religious commitment. Breaking it was considered a serious spiritual failure, not just a financial mistake. You can take this vow today. Speak it out loud right now if you are ready. I vow before God that I will never again borrow money for consumption. I will live within my means. I will wait until I can pay for things outright. I will not enslave my future self to pay for present pleasures. This vow, taken seriously, eliminates most debt at its source. The decision is made once and maintained by spiritual commitment rather than requiring constant willpower in the face of temptation. Practice 2. The tenth before anything. From every source of income, before any spending, the Essenes immediately set aside 1/10 for savings. This was not negotiable. It was not adjusted based on circumstances. It was not reduced when things were tight. The 10th came first, always, without exception. Implement this practice with your next paycheck or income of any kind. Before you pay any bill, before you buy any food, before you spend on anything at all, move 1/10 to a savings account and do not touch it. This simple discipline, practiced consistently, will build reserves that eliminate the need for borrowing. Practice 3. The cooling period. Before any significant purchase, the Essenes observed a waiting period. For small purchases, 3 days. For larger purchases, 7 days. For major purchases, 30 days. During this period, they would not discuss the purchase, not research it further, simply wait. This cooling period eliminated impulsive spending and the borrowing that often accompanies it. Many purchases that seemed urgent lost their appeal after days of waiting. The cooling period revealed which desires were genuine needs and which were temporary impulses that would pass. Practice 4. The Debt Destruction Protocol. For those who had entered the community with existing debts, the Essenes had a specific protocol for elimination. All available resources beyond absolute necessities were directed toward debt elimination. Lifestyle was reduced to minimum while debts were being destroyed. Community members provided accountability and support. If you have existing debt, implement this protocol. Cut all non-essential spending. Direct maximum resources toward your smallest debt while maintaining minimums on others. When the smallest is eliminated, add that payment to the next smallest. Continue until all debt is destroyed. This focused approach, combined with reduced lifestyle, can eliminate even significant debt in months rather than decades. Practice 5. The Contentment Meditation. Each morning and evening, the Essenes would meditate on contentment. They would specifically thank God for what they had. They would remind themselves that enough was enough. They would resist the lie that they needed more than they possessed. This contentment meditation inoculated them against the advertising and social pressure that drives most debt-creating spending. If you are finding value in these revelations, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell. Every week, I reveal another practice from the caves of Qumran. Subscribe now so you do not miss a single revelation. And I want you to do something right now. In the comments below, type, "I live debt-free." When you type this, You are declaring your commitment to implement these practices. Type it now. I live debt-free. Now let me tell you about a man who discovered these teachings and how they transformed his financial life. This is a modern story from after the scrolls became publicly accessible, showing that these ancient principles work just as powerfully today as they did 2,000 years ago. In the years after the scrolls became publicly accessible in the early 1990s, a man named Thomas was researching ancient economic practices for academic purposes. He was a university professor with a comfortable salary, a stable career, and what he considered a normal financial life. He had no particular financial problems of his own that he was consciously aware of, no crisis that drove him to seek solutions. But as he began examining his situation honestly while studying the Essene texts, he realized he had the same vague, pervasive debt that most modern people carry without questioning, a mortgage that would take 3 decades to pay off, consuming a significant portion of every paycheck. Car loans that seemed to renew every few years as one vehicle was paid off and replaced with another, financed vehicle. Credit card balances that fluctuated but never quite reached zero, always carrying some amount forward from month to month. Student loans that had followed him for years after graduation and still claimed a portion of his income. He had accepted all of this as normal. Everyone he knew had similar debts. The culture had taught him that debt was simply part of modern life, that mortgages and car loans and credit cards were necessary tools for functioning in contemporary society. He had never questioned it. As Thomas studied the economic instruction text more deeply, he became increasingly uncomfortable with his own situation. The Essenes had lived completely debt-free for over 200 years, while he, with all his modern advantages, with his advanced education, with his professional income, was chained to multiple creditors. He did the calculation and was shocked. Roughly 40% of his gross income went to debt service of various kinds. Nearly half of his labor was claimed by creditors before he could use his earnings for anything else. He earned what most people would consider a good income, but he had very little to show for years of work because so much went to paying interest, fees, and principal on obligations he had accumulated over the years. He was not building wealth. He was not creating security. He was maintaining obligations that benefited his creditors far more than they benefited him. He was running on a treadmill that moved backward slightly faster than he could move forward. The realization was deeply disturbing. He had spent decades believing he was building a successful life, but he was actually building wealth for banks and lending institutions while remaining personally static or even declining when inflation was considered. Thomas made a decision that seemed radical at the time but now seems obviously correct. He decided to implement the Essene practices as an experiment in his own life. Not just to study them academically, but to live them practically and see what happened. He took the Debt Forbidden Vow seriously, standing alone in his home office and speaking the words out loud, committing before God to never again borrow money for consumption under any circumstances. The words felt strange on his lips at first, countercultural, almost rebellious against everything modern society had taught him. He implemented the 10th before anything practice ruthlessly, setting aside savings from every paycheck before any bills were paid, before any expenses were covered, treating this savings as completely non-negotiable regardless of what else demanded the money. He observed strict cooling periods before any purchase over $50, 3 days for smaller items, 7 days for medium purchases, 30 days for anything significant. He was shocked at how many purchases he had been making impulsively, how many things he thought he needed but did not actually want after a few days of waiting. He began the debt destruction protocol on his existing obligations with aggressive intensity. He cut his lifestyle to the bone, eliminating every non-essential expense, living temporarily at a level far below his income. Every dollar saved went toward debt elimination. He practiced contentment meditation morning and evening, specifically thanking God for what he had, reminding himself that enough was enough, that he did not need what advertisers told him he needed, that his worth was not measured by his possessions. The first few months were genuinely difficult, harder than he had anticipated. His lifestyle contracted significantly as he directed maximum resources toward debt elimination. Purchases he would previously have made without a second thought were now delayed or eliminated entirely. The cooling periods revealed how many of his buying impulses were temporary emotional reactions that faded within days. His family thought he had become strange. His colleagues wondered why he brought lunch from home instead of eating out. His friends stopped inviting him to expensive outings because he consistently declined. He felt isolated at times, swimming against a cultural current that pushed everyone toward more spending and more debt. But progress was undeniable and eventually dramatic. His smallest debt, a credit card with a balance of just under $2,000, was eliminated within 2 months of focused effort. That payment, previously going to the credit card company, now rolled into the next debt. The second debt fell within 4 months, the third within 6 months. As debts disappeared one by one, the snowball grew larger and faster. Payments that had been scattered across multiple creditors consolidated into increasingly powerful attacks on remaining debts. Within 18 months, his car loans were completely gone. Within 3 years, his credit card balances were permanently and irrevocably at zero. Within 7 years, his mortgage, which the bank had structured to last 30 years, was paid in full. Thomas found himself in a position that almost no modern person ever experiences. He owed absolutely nothing to anyone. His income, which had not increased significantly during those 7 years, was now entirely his own. Every dollar he earned was his to save, invest, give, or spend as he chose. Money that had been flowing to creditors for decades now flowed into savings and investments. Wealth began accumulating rapidly, almost shockingly rapidly, once the constant drain of debt payments stopped. But the financial transformation, dramatic as it was only part of the change. Thomas described a psychological and spiritual freedom that surprised him with its intensity. He had not realized how much unconscious anxiety his debt had caused until the debt was gone. He had not understood how much his obligations had constrained his choices, limited his options, and controlled his decisions until those obligations disappeared. He felt physically lighter, as if he had been carrying a heavy pack for so long that he had forgotten it was there until he finally put it down. He later said that discovering the suppressed scroll teachings had changed his entire life in ways he could not have anticipated. Not just his finances, though those were transformed beyond recognition. His marriage improved dramatically when the underlying financial stress that had been poisoning their relationship finally lifted. His work became more enjoyable when he no longer worked primarily to service debt payments. His spiritual life deepened significantly when he experienced the freedom that comes from owing nothing to anyone, the freedom that the Essenes had known and that the Vatican had tried to keep hidden. This same transformation is available to you starting today. Let me speak directly to your situation. Perhaps you are drowning in debt right now. Perhaps obligations consume most of your income. Perhaps you cannot imagine ever being free from the weight of what you owe. Perhaps debt has become so normal in your life that you cannot conceive of living without it. The Essenes lived debt-free for over 200 years, not because they were wealthy by worldly standards, not because they had advantages you lack, but because they followed principles that the powers of this world have deliberately hidden from you. Principles that, if widely practiced, would collapse the debt-based system that enriches banks and impoverishes ordinary people. The Vatican helped hide these teachings because institutional religion benefits from people remaining in bondage. Banks and credit companies do not want you to know that debt-free life is possible. The entire modern economy depends on convincing you that debt is normal, necessary, and permanent. It is not. The scroll reveals another way, a way that was practiced successfully for centuries, a way that is available to you starting today. If you are ready for complete transformation, the 21-day protocol is waiting. The Essene Wealth Code will guide you through debt elimination and prevention using the principles revealed in the long-suppressed scrolls. The link is in the description. Before you leave, type one more time: I live debt-free. Let this be your declaration of independence from the bondage the system has imposed on you. My brothers and sisters in the light, remember what the Vatican tried to hide. The economic instruction text reveals how to live completely free from debt. Never borrow for consumption. Save before you spend. Support one another instead of borrowing from exploiters. Take the vow. Practice the 10th. Observe cooling periods. Destroy existing debt with focused intensity. Meditate on contentment. These practices were suppressed because free people are harder to control than indebted people. Now the truth is out. The scroll is available. The practices are revealed. What you do with them is up to you. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob break every chain of debt from your life. May you experience the freedom the Essenes knew for 200 years. May you never again be enslaved to creditors. May you live debt-free from this day forward. Go in peace. Go in power. Go in prosperity. Until next time, this is Rabbi Enoch, keeper of the scrolls, servant of the light. Shalom.